Okay, so thank you so much for joining us today for How Do You Know When You're Done? And I'm just going to introduce our lovely panelists and then we'll get into it. Edward Carey was born in Norfolk, England. He is a novelist, visual artist, and has also written and directed a number of plays for the National Theatre of Romania and the Villainous Small State Theatre, Lithuania. In England, his plays and adaptations have been performed at the Young Vic Studio, the Battersea Arts Centre, and the Royal Opera House Studio. He is the author of the novels Observatory Mansions, Alva and Irva, and the acclaimed YA series, The Ironmonger Trilogy, which has been an option for film adaptation. After university, Edward worked at Madame Tussauds in London, preventing people from touching the waxworks, and it was there that he learned the incredible story of the museum's founder. From that experience, he wrote the novel Little, which has been published in 20 countries and has been optioned for television. His latest novel is The Swallowed Man, the journey of the 2 years of isolation Geppetto, Pinocchio's father, spent inside an enormous sea beast. Edward lives in Austin, Texas, in the United States, and teaches at the University of Texas at Austin. Thank you for being here, Edward.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Next, Trent Hudley is the author of the short story collection One of These Days, published by Valise Books. He currently teaches at the Lighthouse Writers Workshop in Denver, Colorado. He has taught creative writing in Regis University's master's program and teaches literature and composition at Metropolitan State University and the Community College of Denver. He earned his MFA from the University of Texas in El Paso. He was raised and still resides in Denver, Colorado. Thank you for joining us, Trent.
Thank you for having me.
And last but not least, Alex Temblador is the award-winning author of the novels Secrets of the Casa Rasada and Half Outlaw, a magical realism novel forthcoming from Blackstone Publishing in 2022. She received an MFA in creative writing from the University of Central Oklahoma and has since been a freelance writer for the last 5 years. Her starred Kirkus novel has won such accolades as the NACCS 2019 Tejas Foco Young Adult Award, MG Middle Grade Young Adult Discovery Prize winner of Writers League of Texas Book Awards, and Kirkus' Best of YA Books of 2018. Alex has 2 upcoming anthology publications. Her creative work has been published in Palabritas and Sigala Literary Magazine, and her articles have appeared in outlets like Architectural Digest, Lonely Planet, The Daily Beast, Travel and Leisure, Bustle, Texas Highways Magazine, D Magazine, Photos, among many others. In addition to being the moderator and brains behind Dallas's newest author panel series, Lit Talk, Alex travels the world for her writing career and offers writing presentations and workshops at high schools, universities, and conferences in the US. Thank you for joining us, Alex.
Thanks, I'm so glad to be here.
Cool, so I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and we can just get started. So today, sorry, I just have to take a breath. Today, we are answering the question, how do you know when you're done? And there is really no easy answer to this question. And so I wanted to start with a quote that I came across. And a famous visual artist, Louise Bourgeois, was asked, how do you know when you're done? And her response was, I know it's done when the questions have stopped. And I just love that so much. And I just wanted to start this by asking each of you, what does being done mean to you? Because I think that looks different for everybody and for every work that you do. So Alex, if you want to start us off.
Yeah, I think being done for me, it's kind of similar to that quote. You know, I've written the novel, I've edited it maybe 7 times. Rewritten parts, had other people read it, give it me feedback, write it and work it out again. But I'm not one of those ones that even though it's weird, I'm a perfectionist in other parts of my life, but with my writing, maybe not so much. Once I feel like the story is kind of there and in my head, I'm starting to hear another story, I'm excited to write another book or something else is kind of drawing my attention. I have a good feeling that it's about time to be done. Go to the next step, you know, whether that's giving it to my agent so that we can put it out on submission or whatever it may be, but really kind of putting away so that I can work on the next thing.
Yeah, for sure. Trent, what about you?
I think when the writing starts becoming a job, when it's when it's not an investigation anymore. Sometimes I know when it's done when I start getting didactic, with you know, my stories. Um, when it becomes when it's not fun anymore, I think then I know I've reached a point where, um, again, like the quote is saying, where all the questions have been answered, if that's really possible. I mean, or the questions I've investigated the questions to the point that I feel satisfied with
Right.
my investigation.
Mhm.
And it depends, and I'll probably repeat this over and over tonight. And it depends on the piece, you know, on what it is, the idea, the goal of the piece, and so forth and so on. Right.
Thank you. Ed?
Yeah, I'm loving this, I have to say. I love Alex saying when you hear something else. I think that sounds wonderful, actually, when you start to have that feeling that, all right, I've loved you for so long now. Goodbye, go where you are. You've been beautiful, run along. And I also love Trent saying that business of it becoming a job. Yes, that's it. Because then you can overwork something, and it's a real danger of doing that. You could get so bogged down in it. For me, the whole business of, you know, when do I know when I'm done? I kind of never know exactly, and there's no exact science to it. You know, there never can be. But it's when I always look and I try and test myself. Have my characters gone as far as they possibly can? Have I looked at every single one of them? Have I tested them as far as I can? But also, most of all, is have I left the manuscript alone long enough? If I put it in a drawer and said, go away, I'm going to do something else, and then come back to it so that you can see it clearly? Have I, after various drafts, finally given it to those readers that I trust, before, I mean, Alex was talking about, yeah, before submitting it to agent, to publisher? You know, it's all those little ways you have of testing yourself. And, you know, one of the great things, if you put, you know, the best thing about writing is putting the damn manuscript in a drawer and forgetting about it as much as you're possibly able to, and then trying to read it almost as if you weren't the person that wrote it, so that you can push it to its furthest extent. And then you just go, goodbye. And the novel before last that I finished took me 15 years to write, which is ridiculous, absolutely crazy. And because I made every single error, so I'm very happy to tell people how not to make every single error and how not to make a relationship with a manuscript that long. But you have to have that business. I just love the idea of both of what Alex and Trent were saying. When you hear something else, when that love is transferring somewhere else, as it rightly should, as a writer, we need to keep writing, otherwise we're not doing what we need to do. But also with Trent saying, when it becomes a job, you can kill a book by going over it and going over it and going over it.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that. And I like that you all sort of touched on different aspects of being done. And Ed, you really talked about the different, like, you can be done with something, but then this manuscript also has to, like, you know, go to the next level and on and on. And so I think maybe one definition of being done is just getting to the end. And that, I think, is hard enough as it is. And so I did want to take a moment to really talk about and dive into endings. And so I'm wondering if each of you could just tell me what makes an ending a good ending, and what is an ending supposed to do for a work? And Ed, we can stick with you if you want.
Sure. You know, it's a different thing in short stories, say, than it is in novel writing. Often with short stories, you want to leave the ending open, and to have what William Boyd, a British short story writer, I thought kind of nailed it when he talks about a complexity of afterthought, so that you're still thinking about the short story long afterwards. With a novel, I feel like it's a different thing. That, for me at least, I want to nail the damn thing down and go, here we are, this is it. You can have some open endings, but for me, My novels mostly end in a massive collapse of a building, or a huge amount of deaths, or someone traveling different countries and getting the hell out of where they were, or being released finally. I always, when I write, I always leave myself open to surprises. You have to, I think. I mean, in my experience, so that the book, the short story, whatever it is you're writing, can go in any different direction. But often I have an ending that I'm waiting for. I wrote a kids trilogy, and I knew at the end, I was setting it in Victorian London, I knew at the end all my characters were going to come together in the Houses of Parliament in London when Queen Victoria was there to open Parliament for their season. And I thought, yes! And even when I got to that scene, I didn't know who was going to live and who was going to die. Having, into the third book. And that was what kept it exciting for me. And then when it happened, I thought I was going to kill everybody off. But there was a certain joy of, going, let's be Shakespeare about this. Let's bloody everything. But then actually, in the end, anyway, I won't say, but I changed my opinion because I had to follow the idea of the book. And I think you have to follow what the book is telling you to do. And when you get to that end, you kind of know when it's right, and you know when it's wrong, and you know when to leave them. So often when you're writing, you are just the vessel for it. And actually, when you're with the story is telling you where to go. And so then often I know that last bit vaguely. I know where I'm going to. But not entirely. And I think keeping it alive, it's that avoiding that becoming a job that Trent is talking about. And then you can step back, but also that thing you're talking about, that first draft. Yes, we're all fighting for the first draft. You get to the end of the first draft. Yes, it exists, it's a thing. Hurrah, that's marvelous. And from that, then you go through the actual joy of redrafting. Yes, it's rigorous and everything, but then you can say, I have created a thing. It exists. Look, there it is. And then you ask it, what are you?
Yeah, thank you. Trent?
What I think is a successful ending and how my endings usually end up are two different things, right? Because I'm never really satisfied, but I've tried different approaches. Toni Morrison said that she wrote her endings first and then let the story and then figure out how to get to that ending. I tried that. I'm not Toni Morrison by any means. But I like that sense of discovery that Edward's talking about, that the story dictates, right, where it's going to go. And I think what a successful ending is for me, my personal taste, is I like being left with ambiguity, where that the story is left, but it's living inside of you afterward. That Edward said something earlier, I forget, he said it eloquently, but you're left with that story. You're still pondering that story afterwards, right? And it's not something that's where the question ends, really, right? But that the question maybe is transformed somehow, right? Or elaborated on within the reader, right? When they're in that kind of stories that kind of haunt you. A story that comes to mind is the Cortázar's Asolalo, and I'm not going to go into it, but what that ending does, I still think about it today. I read the story, like, I don't know, however many times, but still at the end of that story, I'm still left with these new questions each time I write it, right? Each time I write it, I wish. Each time I read it. So I think that is successful, right? So each time, and of course, when you reread something, you're always going to find something new in the story that makes the story, that illuminates it more. But I think when you have, and I don't think that's just having to do with how we grow as people and age and so forth. When you read a story and find something, but that those questions that you had from reading 1 to 101 at the end are somehow tying in together and forming a discourse within themselves. Does that make sense? What sort of?
Yeah, for sure.
So I think those types of endings, for me personally, are the most satisfying. That's what I try to achieve.
Awesome, thank you. What about you, Alex?
Oh, this is hard. The whole time y'all are answering, I'm like, what am I gonna say? Ed said every story has a different type of ending, and I feel like endings are kind of like introductions. I think they're the two hardest aspects of a book for me, and I will rewrite them over and over and over again just to get them as perfect as I can. But I am maybe a little bit more drawn to what Trent said, is that ambiguous type of ending that makes you think about the story you read in for a longer amount of time. So for me, I really like those endings that combine some visual element with the theme or the idea of the story, and it brings it together in that one moment where you're just like, oh, that was poetry. Like, that prose writer actually had a little bit of poetry in that last sentence, and it makes it ring in your head for a little bit. But at the same time, I've read endings where I got so mad. I've read endings where I'm just like, oh, that was so sweet. I'm so glad it ended up like that. I think I admire those ambiguous endings because that's what I want to have. I want to have those moments where it's like, oh, that hit me in like a philosophical sense. And now I'm going to think about this story for a long time in a way that maybe even the whole rest of the book didn't get me thinking about. So yeah, that's like a really hard thing, I think, to do. It's a really because it's a very vague way of me describing that type of ending, and when you read it, you know it. I don't even know how else to describe it.
No, but yeah, thank you for saying that it is hard, because I think especially like endings, like every ending is different. Every reader is looking for something different out of an ending, and so that's why I have asked each of you to come prepared with a book and an ending to talk about, because I think, like we can say like, yeah, it has to be ambiguous, but that still feels like really abstract, and like, I wouldn't know how to translate that, and so Alex, if you want to stick with this question, can you talk about the ending that you've come prepared with? You're talking about Bang by Daniel Peña. And what about that ending works for you? And what do you think the writer accomplished with that ending?
Yeah, so in Bang, I don't want to tell the whole story, but basically the ending is one of the main characters, who has not yet died in this whole book, and there's a lot of people who die. He's kind of about to go home, and he's going through a list of all the things he wants when he gets back to Texas. He wants Whataburger, he wants carnitas, he wants anything from Taco Bell. And as soon as he's going to sleep, you find out, God, I hate that. If you haven't read this, I'm really sorry, I'm going to tell you the ending. But an explosion goes off in his room, and what happens in that split second is that the author has had this main character named Uli relive kind of his past in about four or five paragraphs, and he relives like small memories and moments with his mom, with his brother, and he talks about like a birthday party and remembering his mom shouting for him whenever he was under a pool surface. And it's like these flashes of memory that I really like how Daniel just really kind of brought to life like what happens. Like, I don't know if this happens when you die, but it seems plausible. And the last two lines are, and she's forever shouting like that, her voice fading into oblivion, words that have no meaning. And you don't even have to have read the book, but words that have no meaning just is kind of a line that makes you keep thinking and thinking. The reason I chose this one is because I've seen a bunch of authors do this in similar ways. So I was just reading Circe, it's very famous, right? And in that book, at the very end, the main character thinks forward in like a split second. She thinks forward into her future for like 4 paragraphs, and it's like a what if. I think this is what my future is going to be like. And so when authors do that, I really like that style. I think it's something I did in my second book because it's been so long and I put it aside and can't exactly remember. But I like that. It's a very concrete way of ending a story, is either through memory, through future prediction, I guess, foreknowledge. Yeah, I like that. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Ed, what about you?
Well, the book I picked up is perhaps not read that much anymore, but the last paragraph of it. Anyway, I should say the book is called "This Way for the Gas, Ladies and Gentlemen," and it's by the Polish writer Tadeusz Borowski. And the whole book has been about his experience as a Pole, not as a Jew, but as a Pole in concentration camps in Germany and Eastern Europe during World War II. And I come back to this last paragraph. That's how long it is. That's what it looks like. So often as just a piece of purely brilliant writing. And it seems to me he almost sums up all of World War II in these last words. And it's compounded by the fact that the author actually committed suicide not long after writing these lines. And there's some elements of hope, and he's trying to define some dignity to humanity after all the catastrophe. And when you said find the last paragraph, I immediately thought of that. It's a piece of work that I read to my students all the time, that I go back to myself, that I find endlessly moving, because in it, Borowski is trying to sum up the world and what we have left in rubble. And, you know, it feels like we're almost there again right now, but there will be another breath. I pray, I believe things will turn a better course. But just walking down the street and seeing kids playing in masks and everything that we're all experiencing, I keep thinking about Borowski and his belief that, you know, he's basically asking what is a human being, and it's an enormously powerful thing. And he writes it from a grotty flat in a shelled out city in Poland, and it leads. Shall I read the last couple of sentences?
Yeah, of course.
Is that all right? I'd love to read the whole thing, but that would be naughty. But he says, okay, so he summed up what he sees from his windows, and then he says, I take out fresh paper, arrange it neatly on the desk, and closing my eyes, try to find within me a tender feeling for the workmen hammering the rails, for the peasant women with their ersatz sour cream, the trains full of merchandise, the fading sky above the ruins, for the passerby on the street below, and the newly installed windows, and even for my wife who is washing dishes in the kitchen alcove. And with a tremendous intellectual effort, I attempt to grasp the true significance of the events, things, and people I have seen. For I intend to write a great immortal epic, worthy of this unchanging, difficult world, chiseled out of stone. I got very tear up each time I read it. And when he talks about his wife, they were in Auschwitz together, and he lost her, and he thought, I mean, the whole thing is horrific. But the story, it's not a Jewish story of concentration camp, but it's a witness of all these things. And it's part nonfiction, it's part fiction. But his proclamation at the end of hope this difficult world chiseled out of stone to make his mark seems to me so profoundly powerful.
Yeah, that is so powerful. Wow, thank you. Trent, what about you?
So the first book I thought about when I read the email was Cormac McCarthy's The Crossing. And well, I'm enamored with the man regardless. I mean, he is my literary deity. So, but if you've ever read Cormac McCarthy, besides maybe Pretty Little Horses, he's not the most uplifting human being that one's ever read by any means. And The Crossing does not disappoint. He takes his character, Billy, through hell. Dante's got nothing on Cormac McCarthy, right? And what I like about Cormac, what's so beautiful and terrifying about McCarthy, he never goes into reasons, right? He just, things happen. He doesn't try to rationalize him anyway. If you read The Road, we don't know what happened at the end of the road and throughout the road. It's just a catastrophe, right? But he also always within these hellish landscapes and this book is really deeply philosophical about existence, and it's sort of a contemplation of higher powers and God, right? And this character Billy, for some reason, he captures at the beginning of the book, he captures his wolf and he wants to release it into Mexico. And in Mexico, he encounters this kind of hellish landscape, and everybody dies in his family and so forth and so on. But what's so fulfilling about the end is it's kind of uncharacteristic of McCarthy, especially if you read Blood Meridian, in that, and it's kind of similar to The Road, I guess. There is this sense of release, this deep release of all this pent up existential dread, right? And at the end, this character who, I mean, the kid has shot a man. He's seen his brother get massacred in front of him, his parents and so forth. Everybody dies, basically. And he is basically an outcast from the world now because of all of this horrific experiences and so forth, and that existential understanding of the deep kind of baseness of humanity. Excuse me. But at the end of the book, he comes back to the United States. He's older. I think when he started the book he was 17, and then I think it's maybe 6 years later. Excuse me, I forget. But anyway, he's older, and he has come, and he's kind of this relic from the past. This is post World War II, when he comes back to the United States, and he's, there's cars in this little New Mexican town, and he's riding on horseback. He's this drifter that stumbles into New Mexico, camping out. But there's the very last scene is him sitting in the middle of the road, and he just starts crying. Finally, he shows it, because throughout the book he's really emotionless, but at the end, and it gives you this sense of I guess of hope. It gave me, and the sense of release, right? It's like, oh my God, give this guy a break a little bit, So it's got that sort of happy ending-ish to it, but it's not as simple as that by any means. But what I do like, and it doesn't leave this kind of ambiguity that I like. There is this sense of what McCormick is saying, I believe, this sense of hope, right? Again, and it's very straightforward. But I think what I like best about it is that sense of release, and all of this horror and terror that this man has gone through is finally dealt with, and is kind of humanistic, in this human way, right? And it's very satisfying. It's very I ball at everything, but I read this, and I've only read it once. Most of them I've read like twice, but I sat there and bawled for about like 5 minutes just thinking about it again, right? It's because of that release. I was released, right? Because the way he writes, the way the Rand writes is, I mean, he's inside of you, right? He's relentless. He has you by the heart and head and everywhere else, I mean, he engages you. And then at the end of this book, in its simplicity, I think that's why I appreciate it, because of that emotional release.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, thank you. And so I like what each of you said about all of these endings. And I think it's really important to note that you each had to give us a little bit of a synopsis to make us really understand why the ending was as powerful as it was. And Ed, you talked about the ending for the book that you talked about was sort of like he was giving you like this big image of what the world was like after the war. And Trent, you talked about how the ending of this book was sort of like this exhale, this relief of everything that the character had been through. And I think it's important to note that endings are just one piece of the puzzle. Like they do have a really big job to do and they are very important, but a lot has to happen on the way there. And so I want to step back now and ask each of you, like, what kind of writer are you? Are you a plotter, someone who knows like most of what's going to happen on the way to the end? Are you what they call pantsers, where you don't really know and you write yourself, through the story? And to that end, do you usually know how a story is going to end when you're writing it? Alex, I can start with you.
My first 2 books, I was a pantser. I had in my mind an idea what would happen for about halfway through the book. And then I just kind of stopped and was like, I'll figure it out. Like my character will show me where to go. The first book was pretty easy doing that. The second book, when I got on a roll, I wrote that book in about a month and a half. It just flowed out of me, and I've never written anything that fast since. But my third book, I had an idea. I went to my literary agent and told her what it was, and she said, "You have to plot this out. I want to see an outline. I want to see from the very beginning to the last chapter. Find a plot outline somewhere online and give it to me. Set yours up that way, and then send it over to me." Because I don't want you to start this book without really knowing where you're going to go. You have a great idea. It's a cool concept, but it's not quite formulated yet. And I want you to know what it is so that you're just on the right path the whole time. It was so much better than being a pantser. Way better. Plotting out that book felt very good. It came very easy to me. I think I wrote it in like a day and sent it over to her. And as soon as she saw it, she was like, okay, I get what you're trying to do. This is perfect. Go for it. That said, I'm still working on that third book. I'm almost halfway done. And I got to a point where I didn't like how much I felt a little, I don't want to like restricted to follow that plot in some ways. So I took some time to kind of start back over at the beginning, and I keep going to the beginning and then working my way through and going a little bit further, and then going back to the beginning and working my way through and going a little further, because I'm trying to make sure that all of the pieces fit in a way that I would have done if I was pantsing the novel. It's slower, but it seems to be working for me right now. So now I'm in this weird like pantser plotter writing aspect.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It reminds me, Irene Lara Silva is a really amazing poet and author that we work with often. And she said that she usually writes the ending first because she sort of writes the story because she's trying to make sure that her characters are earning that ending. And so that's really interesting how it was sort of easier for you that way.
Yeah,
Ed, what
I
about
wish
you?
I would have done that like she did. She sounds like she did a little better than I did.
Yeah, Ed?
So it's a question. The question is about plotting, right? So it becomes different for me with each book, and so sometimes I feel like I know exactly where I'm going. I wrote a novel about a real human being, so at least to some extent, I had to follow the path of her life, and so that gave me the journey. But that's also still allowed me to go in many different directions that her life didn't actually go into, because it says a novel on it. And by God, I mean to write fiction. But often with me, I find different ways of approaching it work differently. I try to approach things differently each time, and that sort of frees me up. So I'm writing 2 novels simultaneously at the moment, and one I abandoned at the beginning of the pandemic because it's set in a children's hospital, and as everything was going down, I just realized I couldn't write this now. My brain had no space for it. I just couldn't do it. Everything's just, I needed to find somewhere else to be, and so I started writing another novel because I feel like as writers, we need to be writing, not in terms of for the next publication, no, for in terms of the writing itself, for the love of the business of actually just writing. And so I started writing another novel. I had no idea whether it would work out. I had no idea where it was going to go. I knew it would pass the time, and I knew that I would probably love it in due course. And I think we all want to be in that state when we're just writing for the sake of it, for the love of it, for it, reminding ourselves of who we were as children, when we first loved fiction, when we first loved stories. I want to get back to that business of loving stories. And so I started writing. I worked for many years in theatre in different countries, and I've always wanted to set a novel in the theatre. And so for 6 months, I wrote a novel, which is really fast for me, really fast. And at the end, I've got a draft of it now. It's a terrible mess. But something about, the whole idea of, I think something about the idea of plotting and writing a novel is, I believe, in my experience, and it will be different, I'm sure, in many other people's experience, it's really useful in a novel to get a first draft of it done within reasonable time so that it connects with itself. That's my experience. I've had books that contradict that, but in general, having you can take so much time with the next drafts and the next drafts, but get a draft, nail that thing so that it flows in an arc, the characters, the story, the narrator, whatever your narrator is leading to do. So for me, do I endlessly plot? No, I mean, yes and no. I was going to think of Dickens. I was fed Charles Dickens as a child, as an English person. We're fed Charles Dickens like cod liver oil, and you either loathe it or you accept it. And I love that Dickens had to spew out his stuff, weekly, because it was endlessly, published in journals. And there's a kind of wonderful moment in Bleak House where he's got all his characters are approaching the same moment. And they're getting there too soon. They're getting there about 300 pages too soon. He's still got all these other things that he's juggling, but he's got all his characters coming to this one place at this one time, and damn it, he's made an error. So what does he do? He spontaneously combusts the character that they're all running to. And I think there's kind of that moment when you kind of go, I can do this and plot. We can do anything. We can do everything. And for me, keeping bits open, I never want to know exactly what happens at the end. Except when I'm writing about a real life person, well, at the end, people die, and she died at the end. I knew that was coming, but all writers have to surprise themselves as they are writing, so that all readers are surprised as they read. That's a very long-winded answer to your question.
No, that was perfect. Thank you. What about you, Trent?
Well, one thing I will never ever forget, forever to the time I die, I will always associate Charles Dickens with cod liver oil now. Thank you. um, I'm more is a pantser. I've never heard that word before. Pantser. I'm definitely more of a pantser with my short fiction. I just let it go where it needs to go. I'm working on a novel right now, and I have a skeleton. Well, I have an outline. I've plotted it out, but when I sit down to write, it's more like the skeleton because I rarely stay on track. So I guess it's a kind of a combination of pantsing and plotting. But I definitely agree with what Ed was saying about the writer needs to be surprised themselves. I don't really like to know how it's going to end. Although my nonfiction, I plot. It's kind of strange because I want to know, which events that I want to talk about and how those events fit together and so forth and so on. But I'm also talking about pantsing. I started on a short story, and it's turned into a novella, and it was hellish to do that. I don't know why I didn't sit down and try to plot it. But, well, first of all, because I didn't know where it was going. So I couldn't really sit down and plot, but it just kept going and going and going and going and going. Right? So now it's a very long piece. So again, I don't. My default answer is it depends on the piece that I'm working on and how that piece presents it. And I know that sounds hokey and so forth, but how that piece presents itself to me, right?
Yeah. And I'll stick with you, Trent. And I think you've all sort of touched on how sometimes things just don't work. Like Alex, you talked about feeling a little restricted by the outline. And Ed, I was listening to an older podcast, and you talked about getting lost in the research when you were writing Little. And it did take you like 15 years to write. And so I'm wondering, are there things besides trying to get that first draft done as fast as possible? Are there things that you do to keep the momentum going? Because the goal is to get to the finish line, to get to the end. And if it can be like before you start writing, while you're writing, just any tips or things that you might do?
I think, because I write mainly short fiction, and I just want to find out what this is about, what the possibility, what it is. And I go back and I revise all the time. That's where I have the most fun. Getting out those first drafts it's sometimes hellish, right? It's and sometimes it's magical when it comes through, but I just keep going because I'm excited about it, right? I'm excited about these people that are that are presenting themselves, these situations, depending on, what the story is that motivated me in the first place. Like everyone says, it might be an idea or characters or situation, so forth. So I want to see how that unfolds. How am I up to the task, right? And sometimes I'm not, and I will just dismiss it, or maybe I'll save it and go back to it. Depends on what what mess turns up, but. Yeah. So what keeps me motivated is to just find out what these stories are about. So that's really my main motivation. I just it's few and far between. And again, this probably kind of sounds cliche, but I love those moments when you are submerged in the writing, and it's just kind of. I think Alex, you were talking about how you wrote your was it your first book in like a month or so, or your second?
Second book.
Yeah. So you have those moments where you're just swept away, right? It's kind of addictive, right? It's really, it feels really good, and you feel really like a writer, It's like, so I don't necessarily go and search for those moments, but I'm always you know, anticipating, is it going to happen today? Is it going to happen today? So that's part of it too, right? Because I'm kind of that I don't know, that being swept away junkie. You know, I love that feeling. It's when I feel most like a writer. It's when I'm most. But Zadie Smith had this has a quote. She talks about how she is most honestly herself when she's writing, right? And that is definitely one of the motivations. You're free of all of the, you know, distractions of everyday life. You're free of all the distractions of self-doubt and so forth and so on. You're free, and you're in that moment, right, where this thing is living through you. And I know that sounds really hokey, and I'm not really into all the, you know, that kind of new agey type stuff. But there is a moment when you're caught up in that experience of writing, right, that it's transcending.
Yeah. What about you, Ed?
I have to say, I think Trent saying that it's beautiful. I think that's exactly it. And that's why we're doing. Remember, we're doing, you know, we're writing because it's fun. We're writing because we love it and we have a passion for it. You know, and that journey of discovery is so important. That's, you know, that is what is, that's what keeps us going. And it is that private thing. This is it. You've created these things. You know, we exist to tell stories. In the end, we're nothing but our own stories. You know, and we long for those moments that Trent was talking about, and that Alex said in 2 months or 1 month, you know, you finish a book, you know, but you know, it doesn't always come. I'm with you, Trent. You're kind of waiting. Oh my God, you know, will it happen today? You know, often when I wrote, rather like Alex, when I wrote my first novel, I did it with great speed. It happened, and back then I was an habitual smoker, and I think I just lived on cigarettes, and it was the perfect existence. I was in rural France, and anyway, don't do it that way, but you know, I could punctuate every sentence with a cigarette. But it's actually, there is that joy when you feel you know someone, you feel you know a story, when you feel it's going somewhere. And I think, you know, one of the big things I would say is it's yours and keep it to yourself. I see Sam smiling because, you know, she knows I've said this before, but I often think, you know, before you get to a first draft of a novel, it has to only be yours. Don't tell a single other person about it. Let it grow to be its own thing. You know, only you and it should have a relationship, burgeoning, moving up. I've killed novels because I've talked about them too much.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Let them grow. And the other thing I was thinking about, you were just talking about that, the pleasure of it. You know, Eudora Welty said something which I thought is actually really useful. You know, we're talking about plots, but you know, she said plot is in many ways basically a projection of character. And I think it's brilliant. You know, how far can we take our characters in so many different ways? What can we do to them? You know, and it's joyful. We create our people to give them hell. If we don't give them hell, if we don't smack them through absolute shit, you know, we haven't got them earning everything. And I think it's actually that, seeing what comes out at the end, whether you have the weeping Cormac McCarthy character in the end, whatever you do, you know, it's that love of it. And, you know, it's that business, you know. Jeanette Winterson says, you know, I'm telling you stories. Trust me. And she says that in her novel, The Passion, again and again. And it's that business of we are only our stories. What's left of all the civilizations? It's the art, it's the architecture, it's the pieces of art. It's we are these stories. You know, we are these stories out in this terrible time, these stories of death and racism and, you know, a country on edge. My country is, you know, believe me, you don't have it yourself. You don't have a monopoly on countries disappearing into hell. My country's doing the same thing. But you know, but we tell stories and we reveal ourselves by it. You know, but I do think, you know, Trent, when you're saying Do I believe in, in this hokey stuff? Yes, I believe in it 100%. There's magic in storytelling. There's so much magic. You don't know how it happens. It's just you and a piece of paper, and from that you can go anywhere and be anything and travel everywhere, and it costs you no more if you have 2 characters or 5,000, and it's that bliss. And all I can say is I know when I'm not writing, I'm a pain in the backside to be with. One needs to create, that whole feeling. How do you express yourself? How does humanity express itself except through the arts? How do you know what a human being is except through the arts? I'm saying this because I'm mad because there's a British politician who's now pushing people during the pandemic, artists, to retrain as, something else. Do you not understand? We are nothing if we do not properly question ourselves, and that's what we do endlessly as writers, artists, musicians, painters, everything. I beg your pardon. This was not supposed to be a rant, but I should stop now.
No, that was incredible. Thank you. Alex, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so if I start losing the momentum, there's about 3 things I do. First thing, I really like to read while I'm writing a book. I get inspired by other authors. I can feel the love and the hard work that they put into their writing. Just reading the poetry of their sentences, just, I don't know, makes me feel good. Like I can do that too. And I try to choose writers maybe who have different styles than I do, styles that I want to attain to one day. It's not my style, but it just gives me something else different to read than maybe what I'm writing, and that helps my brain in some ways. Other times, if I feel the momentum dying down while I am writing, like I said, I will go to the beginning, kind of read through what I've wrote, because it just boosts my confidence a little bit more. Oh man, that was pretty good. I'm getting it. I'm doing something well. I'm writing that well. Did I write that scene? Ooh, okay. So that gives me a little bit more momentum. And then third, if things are really, really hard, I try to talk with a literary friends. I don't know about everybody else. When I moved to Dallas, I didn't have literary friends. I was just trying to make friends, and then I had to go find a literary community here. And when I found them, I got to have conversations about books and the craft of writing and plot and endings and beginnings and publishing and everything in between. And that, I don't know, it just gives me inspiration and excitement to take all the stuff that we're talking about and do it in my book and do it for my career. And so right now, because of the pandemic, we can't meet up in person as we once did, but I really enjoy conversations like this and listening to other authors and what they have to say. It really drives me to continue to work well, and to work hard and to just create and see where my story is going to go.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Listening to conversations like this one is always what makes me want to get right back to the page. Okay, yeah. And so I asked each of you to come prepared with something that you've yourself written to talk about. And if you don't want to spoil the ending, you don't have to read it, but I know that everyone listening would like to hear you read your work as well. And if you could just talk about how you approached getting to that ending, what about it was difficult, and how you solved the problems that you encountered. So Trent, I can come back to you if you're ready.
That's kind of a hard question. Like I said, how do I answer this? This is a hard one. When I have an ending of the story, I mean, it's again, I'm just I'm surprised by it. I don't really like to, figure out. Like I said, when I tried to write from the end to the beginning, I failed miserably. So I'm that pantser guy again, sir. So it just kind of, I just meander through it. So it's and then I've never really had a problem ending with it not congealing, because I do revisions and revision and so forth.
Yeah.
I've changed endings and so forth because it didn't fit with the rest of the story and so forth. But I've never really struggled with any of the endings per se of my story. So I don't really have one particular story that I could use as an example of having a major difficulty with that. Because again, I just kind of it just sort of grows organically for depending on the story that it is. So I haven't really had, again, too much difficulty with ending stories. Maybe changing, again, an ending, but I can't really think of anything from the book by any means that I had any particular difficulty with an ending. I know that's not what you want to hear, but it hasn't been that stressful for me to at least thus far. I'm probably jinxing myself right now, but yeah. So I mean, it's not real. I haven't had any particular difficulties where it's just been pulling out my hair or what's left of it by any means. So sorry.
No, you're good. Alex, what about you?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about my book, Secrets of the Casa Rasada. The ending is very controversial among people who read my book. About half of them hate it. They get mad at me. The other half just don't even mention it. Like they don't, not that they love it, but they just don't think anything about it, I guess. And so I'm really torn about my ending. And I think it's maybe the reason that people don't love the ending is because I've gotten a few feedback. Some of them say they just really like the characters and the story was great and they want me to continue on, or they felt like I left it a little too open-ended and they were expecting a second book. Do you have a second book? Do you have a second book? At the time, this was my first book. It was my MFA thesis. I was still learning a lot maybe if I was writing it now, I wouldn't have ended it the way I did. But I was just like, I read it and I like it. I like the way it ends. Do you want me to read a bit? Did you mention you wanted us to do that?
Yeah, you can read for sure.
Okay. There's two characters here. Martha's my main character, and then she's sitting with her abuela, which is her grandmother. Following her gaze, I saw a neighborhood that I had once been so scared of. Brown children, lifeless lawns, colorful houses sighing with age, and a shimmering wave of heat that weighed down on everything. I thought about the house that was behind us, how it stood out among the others, but still sagged, pilled, and grew older. I glanced at Abuela out of the corner of my eye. She was pursing her lips and then relaxing them as if she wanted to say something, but she never did. Instead, she pursed her lips some more, rubbed her knuckles in her lap, and stared straight ahead. She didn't notice the few flecks of Pepto-Bismol colored paint that fell onto her shoulder and into her white hair. Tentatively, I reached out and covered her hands with my left hand, sending a wave of my don to her knuckles, hoping to ease the pain of the secrets that we had suffered. I like the ending, personally, because I was really aiming for that little ambiguity. I wanted, and I did this with my second novel, and I hope to do it with my third novel. I always like to end books on kind of an acceptance, like the character accepts what has gone on in their life, where they're at in their life, and the things that have made them who they are, even if it's not good things. Even if the whole book, they hated everything that happened, they were upset about it, they're still pissed off by the end, but they have some type of acceptance and kind of what Ed and Trent talked about earlier, a little bit of hope that things are going to be a little bit different now that they've accepted these things. But if I could go back, I would probably give a little bit more space in the story between the ending and maybe the big reveal. I think that's what people want a little bit. But I don't like ending so like with a cute little bow. I don't like that. But that's just me. So I hope people like the ending if they read the book. If you don't, I'll have a second book come out and maybe you'll think I've gotten better at it.
Great, thank you. What about you, Ed?
Well, I've got my book a little. I've got another book that's out in January, but I'm not going to talk about that. So this is the book that took me 15 years to write, and it's about a real person. It's about Marie Tussaud, Madame Tussaud of Waxworks fame. And when I was getting to the end, and in fact, I knew the end was a stamp. I wanted it to be this sort of triumphant, screw you, world, from this ancient mollusk of a woman. She's now 89 years old. She knows she's about to die. She's passed beyond time. I feel like we can all touch Victorian time and feel we know it. But beyond that, the French Revolution feels unknowable. It's that step beyond time, for me at least, that you can't get to. And so for me, it's her coming to us finally through history and saying, push off, I'm going, and I no longer have anything to do with you, but you'll never forget me. And what a life, she's saying. Look at my life. Your lives will be pathetic in comparison. That's what's underneath, but it's also what she's suffered, what she's gone through. But I wanted it to be a summation, and I wanted her to go, boom, goodbye. Or at least to go, this is it. I've witnessed death all through my life, and now it's my turn. Do you want me to read it a little bit?
Yeah, if you could.
Okay. There is a state between life and death. It's called the Waxworks. I live at the top of the house in our rooms with my family, past the door marked private, strictly no admittance, keep out, staff only. This is my bedroom. In here are my own things, never to be displayed, always kept private, my personal collection, my personal history. And here he comes every day, my seventh and final doctor, Dr. Marcus Healy, a balding man, corpulence setting in, though he tries to hide it, to busy himself about me. He moves me as if I can't move myself, fusses over me like a child with a toy. This world has turned mechanical. The new world is made of iron. Life now is heavy, propelled by steam and pistons. In place of candles, people illuminate themselves by gas, which gives off a light without mystery. Here's a sign of my great age. People don't look the same as they used to. Men grow whiskers until they look more like spaniels than men, and use what wax they have to shape their enormous facial hair. And there is something else new. Francoise, her son, is worried that it may hurt our business. This newest thing is called the Daguerreotype. It traps an image of life, captures on polished silver. It's much quicker than wax. It can be guaranteed not to make mistakes. They want to take my image with their machine. I intend to die before they do it. Here I am, breathless, in bed. I can see the end clearly enough in this room. I'm 89 years old. I shall not see 90. I am Anne Marie Tussaud née Groscholz, little, who shall never go away.
Amazing. Thank you. And Ed, I'm going to stick with you for this last question, because you have already sort of talked about how you really abide by the rule that you have to keep a book to yourself until, you've done as much as you can. And really, like, for writers, like, you really do get to the point where there's nothing else that you yourself can do without having other people read it. And our works are always in flux. And there's going to be an editor who looks at it. There might be an agent who looks at it. But what does it feel like for you when you've sort of gotten to that point where you've taken it as far as you can? Like, how do you know? Is it just a feeling? Do you get to the point where you just don't like what you're writing or reading anymore?
It's generally for me, I get to a point where I've got a really solid first draft or more. The thing feels sturdy in itself. That's important. It feels like it is itself, that it's grown into being itself. But when I'm ready to turn it over, there has to be enough of it so that I feel I'm ready to do it. And then when I do it, what does that feel like? You're asking. It feels, we all have our trusted readers, or if we're lucky, we have our trusted readers, and we give, my wife is the first person I give my books to. She's also a writer, and this pandemic novel I've given to her after I finished the draft. I just gave it to her, but like a week ago, and I gave it and run for cover and go, what the hell? Because I know she'll tell me exactly how it is. And she gave me wonderful and positive feedback. But you have to get to that point where you want feedback, and then you need to listen to it. But it needs to be with people you trust. I always say in a workshop situation, when I'm teaching workshop, you can't take on everybody's criticism, and you have to remember that your voice is the only voice that matters. It's your story, it's nobody else's story. But other people can help you to make it be that best version of itself. And so it's a question of trust. But never change anything because someone has said it and you're not sure about it. No, stick by your guns, what you want. It's your story, and it's only your story, and it will only be. And I do think now I've got an editor in America who pulls me apart, but in a really helpful way, and pushes things forward. And I'm very grateful for that. I haven't had, I've had different and great editors before, but this has been an editor who helps me. We want to help each other with our fiction, but it's got to exist before it can have that help.
Yeah, thank you. Trent, do you have anything to add? Oh, I think you're muted.
Yeah, I'm muted. It's got the little sign there. Yeah, I completely agree with Ed. I think you have to. Well, for me, I have to have that. I have one person that I who's my reader, is a good friend of mine. I trust him. Listen to everything he says. But when I'm done with a piece, after I've reached that point, or I've had my friend reading it, and I feel that it's a strong piece, and I feel that it's done, I kind of just don't want to do anything else. I just kind of want to admit that I just want to get done with it. I'm finished. I don't even want to read it. I don't like reading it during readings or anything. I do, but I want to get on to that next piece, right? That next thing that's gnawing to get out, right? Does that answer that?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, Alex, what about you?
Yeah, so when I get to a point in writing my book, I've written it out, edited it, done all I can do. It doesn't feel like an ending to me to give it to somebody else. I'm actually at a point where I'm ready to be in a dialogue about the story. Maybe, and it's usually like I've done all I can do, and if I do it anymore, I feel like I'm going to mess it up. So somebody have a dialogue, a conversation with me. Let's just, whether that's my literary agent or I do give it to my dad. My dad gives me great feedback, and I like that because my dad didn't grow up reading like voraciously like I do. So he gives me kind of like just the everyday type of reader, what they're going to get back from it, what is missing. But he has a very good feel for stories. He really likes film. And so I like that aspect that I can get from him, but I also give it to my literary agent about the same time. She reads it, and then I get feedback, conversations. I work on it some more. And then usually my literary agent gives me a great beta reader who always seems to know something very specific about my story that I can't find on my own. Like my last book has a motorcycle club in it, and I didn't have like anybody literary who was part of a motorcycle club to read it. But surprisingly enough, one of her authors grew up with motorcycles and part of clubs, and my agent was part of them. So it worked out. So when I can get other people who can give me feedback, I get excited. I go work on it some more, give it back to my agent. We get more feedback again. I don't feel like my book is done. Really, it's I will move on to other books and I get other ideas and I get excited to write them. But until that book is either like getting published or it's just died out, which is fine, and I can just kind of feel like something is off my chest and really dive into another book. So between like my second and third book, I think I started like 5 novels and I really didn't like go super far with all of them. One of them I think I will finish for sure one day, or actually 2 of them I will finish. But it took me working on 5 novels to finally get the story that I'm working on now that I'm excited about.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I think that's a really great takeaway. You know, you're done when you're ready for the next thing. Mm-hmm. That's a great answer. Cool. So we're going to open up the floor for questions now. And we did have a question in the chat box that I'm just going to start with. I just have to find it. 1 second. Mm-hmm. Oops. Okay. Oh, I don't know. Oh, okay, found it. Never mind. Okay, so Louis Fisher was wondering, I have a memoir that is packed with action, civil war, genocide, persecution of progressives. Main character turned his life around. Can the ending be an invitation to readers to support the ongoing struggle for economic and social justice through a nonprofit? Would anyone like to take this?
I think it can. Depending on how you write it, I don't know if you want to make it really didactic. I mean, it needs to have, and I mean, all novels and stories and, have some aspect of the political. I mean, we can't escape it. I'm one of those guys. I mean, we're social beings, right? And that's how we form our societies with politics and so forth. So we really can't escape it. But if you're going to turn it into propaganda, right? That may, or if it feels like it's slipping into propaganda, I don't think that's going to be as effective as is if you are telling a story about people's lives, and within those people's lives, there are issues, right, that revolve around these particular political ideas and economic ideas and so forth. So, and a lot of people didn't like it, but I liked it a whole lot. Jonathan Franzen's freedom and his idea, his purity, and they're huge commentaries about politics and social issues, economics, and so forth. All of his big popular novels all have those aspects in it, but he doesn't sacrifice the people, his characters, for the ideas. The ideas are part of the characterization, he doesn't go on these big tangents. So I mean, there's really not that much wrong with you go on these kind of tangents of philosophical ideas, and as long, again, as the ideas, and I'm actually going to be doing a workshop for WLT about not turning in your characters into mouthpieces for ideas, right? I think that takes away from a good story. I mean, if you wanted to write philosophy or you want to write political science, and you want those ideas to be, straightforward without any of the messiness of humanity, right? And ideal and theory and so forth, then those obviously have their place. But if you're writing creatively, I think the most important thing for me anyway is that creating people that your readers can feel for. Yeah, I think it can be done, but it just depends how.
Great, thank you, Trent. So our next question is from Michelle. Do you ever feel pressure to craft a happy ending for a work? Alex, Ed, you're shaking your head.
Ed, do you want to answer?
Go for it, Alex.
Okay. I feel pressured sometimes to write endings where I wouldn't maybe use the term happy. I would say like there's this idea that I have to make the reader content. They have to feel comfortable and comfortable enough to be like, that was a good story. Now let me put that aside and go on to the next one. I don't like writing stories really or endings that make people feel comfortable. I don't like that. I tend to push against that idea of leaving a reader contented. I want them not to be content with things that I've written about, because I want them to continue thinking about these things and wondering, and you know, if they want to go back and read what I wrote, then that's great too, or like go forth and look for other works that make them think about those things further. So I guess I do feel that I don't like it, and I would say don't feel pressure to do any of the rules that anybody makes up, whether it's readers or publishing. You know, rules are there meant to be broken in the literary world, in my opinion.
Great, thank you. And so this is our last question of the day. Heidi is wondering, how do you know when you cut enough away if your first draft is 3 times longer than it ought to be? Some of the tangents are obvious, but I really like my subplots. Ed, would you want to answer this one?
I can have a go at that. Having written the novel that took me 15 years to write has been every single, you know, some novels really behave and they don't argue with you. They follow a smooth path. Others wrestle with you and are pain in the backside and won't sit still. And I did tons of research on one book, and it was huge, and I couldn't find this. I loved everything I researched. I put everything in. I discovered that in Paris during the French Revolution, there were thoroughbred dogs running around the streets because it gave the owners of the dogs away as aristocrats. So they shoved off the smart dogs, and I thought, yes, I want that in my novel, but it had nothing to do with my novel, so I had to go, no, cut it out. I think in the end, you have to come back and go, well, what is your story about? Who are your characters? What's going on? What matters to it? And you do end up then having to cut. I made so many mistakes with this book. And I had so many characters that I got rid of because suddenly I had to ask myself, what was it about? And it was about this one person. And I think it's fine for a novel in drafts to change its shape, to change how big it is, how small it is. That can happen. I've never had it happen with me in my instance so enormously. I think if you've got huge subplots and things like that, are they still keeping the action of the novel going? Are they still true to the heart of the novel? Are they still true to the spirit of the novel? If they are, and they feel essential, keep them. It's okay. I mean, I just feel like, it's almost impossible to know. As I say, I was dipped in Victorian fiction as a kid, and there are 1,000,001 subplots. But how do you cut enough away? Well, I think also that moment when you do start cutting away, oh God, and you go, this is this person's story, and here it is. You actually end up with a feeling of strength about a manuscript that you might not have had before. Sometimes you write off in different places and you don't need to. I remember I wrote this character who loved nothing but pigeons and lived in a derelict house and loved pigeons and seagulls and collected them. And my editor said, but she's got nothing to do with the plot. And I said, I know, but she's so great, isn't she? I loved her. And she died, and not within the book. But you know, we have to make that. We have to adventure, go places with writers. But then I think we also have to be strict with ourselves. It's hard to know without knowing the specific case, but you have to stop a novel from running away with you, because they also have a habit of doing that.
Well, thank you so much to our panelists. That is it for the day. And we say this at every third Thursday, but the best way to support authors is to buy their books. And so support indie bookstores. These are the books that our panelists recommended today, but you can also find their books. They're all linked on our website. And yeah, so thank you so much to Alex, Ed, and Trent.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.